the valley of the shadow of death, I take a look at my life and realize there's nothing left. Cause I've been blasting and laughing so long that even my mama thinks that my mind is gone. But I ain't never crossed a man that didn't deserve it.
Hello and welcome to week 2 of Fantasy Llama's Gut versus the Geek. This week we're going to cover 3 items in about 15 minutes for you. The first item will be the standard fantasy starters of the week. We'll give you from a couple perspectives, then we're going to move on to item number 2. For those of you who have any interest in possibly placing a little wager on a game, we're going to give you the pick'ems of the week.
Llama locks.
And finally, number 3, we're going to go through some add, drop, and trade value picks for you as you move forward in your fantasy season. With that being said, I'm Aaron Vella, and I'm the Gut.
And I'm Brad Reimer, I'm the Geek.
With this going on, now we'll go to Brad. We'll talk to you about the fantasy statistics that you looked through last week that show the accuracy of the Llama.
What we basically do is generate from the Llama, something that I created at fantasyllama.com. It is an algorithm that runs 1 million variables through each player each week, and it...
Wait, 1 million?
1 million.
1 million.
It effectively projects what the player can feasibly do in the different conditions and different variables to perform in each week. And last week, being week 1, it's very difficult to go in and effectively say this player is going to do this. New player, new team.
It's kind of like I said last week. Last week the Gut felt pretty empty going in, making some picks. There's really not much to work with. And we're talking about analytics. We like to work with analytics from this season. Sure, we can look to the past, but now we're working in the now moving forward.
Correct. So last week, week 1, this is what effectively happened. QB1, an anomaly week. We described that, talked about it earlier today and then earlier this week, especially after the game.
Yep, and we look at Peyton Manning. Amazing performance. But 7 touchdowns in a game, that hasn't happened in about 40-some years.
40-some years.
So we're not going to look for that to happen every week. It's like anything, you work with averages, you throw out the high, throw out the low, then you find the meat of what's working with us.
Exactly. So in the end, for the QB position, QB1, all the starters, I was 10 points shy on all the positions.
It's pretty solid.
So roughly average per week. Now again, this is for a 12-team league on a PPR. QB pass is 4 points. So, you know, it kind of sets a little barrier to what type of league you're playing in. But it showed an average of 30 points per week. And would you agree that that's about what produced?
It looked pretty solid. How did the running backs look?
Running backs, 2.86 over on the whole entire position.
Wow, that's a pretty accurate. And it was kind of a, I would almost say a weird week for running backs, and you still hit it pretty close to the head. That's solid.
Exactly. And for RB2, now, you know, today's football, that actually matters. Think about Bryce Brown, Ben Tate, etc.
Yep.
That one I was a little shy on because I think now as football changes, this will happen each and every year, but I was 4.52.
And how the wide receivers come?
Wide receivers was shy 3 points.
Very nice, very nice. And the tight ends help as we move through?
Well, actually, I'll actually step through the rest of wide receivers because it gets really attractive from this point forward.
Nice.
Wide receiver 2, 0.3 off. 0.3.
0.3, not 3 points, 0.3. Even the Gut understands those kind of numbers.
Wide receiver 3, 1.72. A little bit more difficult position to run. But tight end 1, now this is where it gets fun. 0.83.
Wow.
Kicker, 0.09.
Kickers, I don't even pay attention to kickers. How you're getting that stuff right, I don't get it.
Well, it's run on defense. I don't want to go too much into it. Defense special teams, 0.94.
Very good.
So again, what this covers is taking each position, all 32 that are playing, because there's 32 teams, and says what did they do as an aggregate position. And that was today's production on the X report.
So now we'll go on to the consensus and individual starters of the week for our fantasy pick'em. So again, if you have a lineup, pay attention to this. We're going to give you a few options.
This is sponsored by fantasyllama.com. So, you know, to start, last week we placed a wager and we also went in and said, okay, well, who is going to do what? And effectively, the Gut won. It's by let's call by a fallacy or
I would like to thank Brian Cushing for that great catch and return of the Texans that really took me over the hump. So Brian Cushing, if you're watching, which you should be, thank you.
Well, guess what? The reason why I should have won is because you double counted TDs.
Well, scoring, schmoring. You set up the scoring. I did.
Well, effectively, the first week went to the Gut. And this week we are going to make a new wager. So what's the new wager?
I think we'll go along the same lines of loser buys lunch.
Let's get spicy. What about a dump tank or something like that?
If we can find one, I'm in.
All right.
I don't like my picks.
Okay, well, here we go. So this week, QB consensus, Matt Shaw at Tennessee.
I'm at Tennessee. I tell you what I liked.
Versus Tennessee,
Versus
sorry.
Tennessee. What I liked about Matt Schaub an awful lot this week, extremely accurate coming out in the second half. The Texans upped the tempo of their game. If you didn't hear Trent Dilfer say it, he said it about 50 times. But they upped the tempo of their offense in the second half, and he was really on, especially with Andre Johnson.
I agree, and I think Arian Foster's a little slow. I think he's missing a step. I think Ben takes a good change of pace back. But I also think that Matt Schaub is on, he's on progress to have a pretty decent season. Tennessee, look, what happened to the Steelers, that's not Tennessee's defense, although I think that they're good. But I think Matt Schaub, big day.
Absolutely. Who do you have for your individual pick of the week?
Individual. So in this position last week, the gut won. And I think you had Drew Brees.
Correct.
And I had Tony Romo.
So who are you going with this week?
Well, I missed by 2 points.
Who are you going with
2.
this week?
I'm going to go with Drew Brees.
Shocker, shocker.
Drew Brees versus Tampa. And the reason why, again, the heat map, as we will describe later, in the heat map, he has got plenty of opportunity to not only tire this defense out, but being that New Orleans defense is actually pretty weak, they're going to be tired too. It's going to be a slinging game.
So you're going with that. You know, I will never argue against the pick of Drew Brees. He always throws, he's always accurate, he's always got a creative game plan with his coach Peyton behind him. For myself, I went with Aaron Rodgers. I figure it's an angry Aaron Rodgers coming off their second consecutive loss to the San Francisco 49ers. They're at home. The other thing I'm looking at is the Washington Redskins defense.
Right.
Last week they got beat up a little bit in the passing game, and I believe the Green Bay Packers have a deeper receiving core. Jordy Nelson looks like he came back pretty darn healthy from his offseason surgery. Randall Cobb looks like he's recovered from the bicep issues he was having.
Right.
So I'm really seeing the Packers coming into this game at home with a sense of urgency. I think Aaron Rodgers goes big.
And in my one tidbit, I'd say to the positive on your side, I think that Washington's defense was a little overexposed, but here's my biggest thing. When you introduce a new offense, a completely new offense to the NFL system, you got to expect that this is going to happen.
Sure.
Philadelphia shocked the system. Now, I call it the chip sis. And I think that the chip sis is in its youthful stages. I think a couple more weeks, you have highly paid NFL coaches, coordinators that will plan around this. But on the flip side, I think Washington is reeling. I think they're trying to find answers. So I think that this is a perfect opportunity for Aaron Rodgers to step in and do his job.
Exactly, and I don't think they want to go 0-2, especially with the second game being at home. Now let's go on to our consensus running back pick. And this week we have
Arian Foster versus Tennessee.
Arian Foster. Was it just not a minute ago? You're telling me this guy's got like a broken leg and can't run anymore?
No, I'm telling you right now that I made that pick because he did look slow, but I think what's going to happen, Kubiak's going to get them down the field with Tate in the passing game. Arian Foster has a send for the end zone, and he'll get in.
As a consensus pick, I'll kind of agree with you there. As Kubiak did mention, he's going to give Tate touches.
Right.
And Foster didn't play much in the preseason. Probably is getting his legs. I don't think he actually played at all in the preseason. Getting his legs back underneath him.
Correct.
So I can see where that's coming from.
Correct.
On to the individual picks. Who are you going with as your running back?
Well, I'll start with, again, you beat the Geek in our head-to-head competition on that position, but I'm going with LaShawn McCoy versus San Diego. The reason why I'm making that selection is because I think Philadelphia shocked with the chip sis. They shocked the world. They brought a new offense in that people weren't prepared for. Eventually, in call it week 3, defensive coordinators will be able to pick up on that. But I think San Diego is week number 2 victim of the system. I think LaShawn McCoy all day long.
I can see some of that yes and no. But what I also saw in that first week was Michael Vick missing a lot of open people downfield.
Yeah.
That's going to take a lot of yards away from McCoy once he starts hitting those. I think the one thing I'll agree with you on here is I don't think San Diego has the legs to run with them if they get going, but I think a big part of that's going to be Vick tightening up his throws a little bit downfield and hitting those big plays and just simply taking yards away from Shady McCoy.
Yeah, next man depth, San Diego does not have it.
Okay. My individual pick, I really enjoyed making this pick. Mr. Matt Forte of the Chicago Bears. This year, this week, he's going against the Minnesota Vikings. One thing we noticed last week, watching the game, Reggie Bush torched them on the ground and through the air. I see a very similar skill set with Forte and a very similar theory from an offensive perspective with Coach Trestman giving Forte the ball in a variety of ways. I think Forte goes big, and now he's actually getting the goal line touches.
Right, and I agree with you on most fundamentals. On the statistics side of it, if I look at the actual heat maps that we produce to fantasylama.com, I'll tell you right now that I think he's got a good opportunity. I think that Cutler is going to be spreading the ball out quite a bit, which may trim away from Forte's actual touches.
In the end, I still think they get down there. Forte hits pay dirt with a couple of touchdowns this week. Moving on to wide receivers, our consensus pick.
Consensus pick, fantasylama.com, the algorithm states Stevie Johnson versus Carolina. Now, if you watch any of your big sports shows, any of your other fantasy shows, they're not going to give you Stevie Johnson in this game. Why? Because I think what they're afraid to do is they're afraid to get the average user, the average Joe, thinking that, statistically this could happen.
Right.
What is your thought? Because I think your perspective as the gut is the average Joe. You're gonna convey to me and convey to the public and the viewers what the gut feels.
One thing I think the gut sees with this is I think something that folks are afraid of is a rookie quarterback.
Right.
What we did see was a rookie quarterback play very well against a very sound defensive mind in Bill Belichick last week.
Prepared.
Yes. Stevie Johnson is their big hitter. If he can get somebody deep on him, it's going to be Stevie Johnson. E.T. Manuel's got the arm to get it there. I can see this happen.
And yeah, obviously I agree. I created the algorithm, so.
So let's go with your individual pick this week at wide receiver.
I hate to be a one-team honky, but Deshaun Jackson versus San Diego. The Chipses. Now that is not borrowed. That is all mine. Now you can use it, maybe.
So what do you think? What do you think about Deshaun Jackson? Why are you calling him this week?
Well, I think as we talked earlier today, Deshaun Jackson looks happy again. And if any athletes that actually fit well in a system, if you look back to Oregon, the type of athletes, the type of schemes they ran, Deshaun, McCoy, Vic, they're all perfect. I just think, again, stepping off of the Chipses, the whole momentum that they brought into this week too, I think Deshaun Jackson, the athleticism versus San Diego, they're not ready for him. New system, big day.
I can see where you're coming from, the speed of the system, this and that. But what San Diego also saw was Vic's propensity to go to to go to Jackson. So what you may see of them is start to pull defense rotated over on him a little more heavily, force him to go in another direction. We all know their receiving core is a little depleted at this point, so I think it could roll coverage a little more heavily to Jackson in this instance. Big playability, sure, but I don't think the consistency sits there for week 2.
And I'll give you my last counter on that, and then we'll go to your individual pick. Avant, a senior receiver that knows his way, he's a veteran. They did that same thing against Washington. They pulled the attention off of Jackson by going to Avant, and then what happened? When they were biting on both of them, to Self.
Gotcha. And for this week's pick for myself, the individual gut pick, I'm truly going gut here. This is probably one you're not going to see most anywhere. I don't even know if his analytics know this guy exists. But I'm going with Kembrell Tompkins from the New England Patriots versus the New Jersey Jets. I'll call them the Jersey Jets. Essentially,
hey boy, Jersey.
Tompkins got targeted an awful lot in week 1, only came away with several catches. Here's what I think. Brady gets a little bit more accurate with him. The other thing we're looking at is Danny Amendola. Hey, shocker, newsflash, he's hurt again.
Wow.
Shocker. Last time, when this happened in the preseason...
My analytics still need to predict that.
In the preseason, we did see the same thing happen.
Right.
And what happened? Brady was feeding Kembrell Tompkins like crazy. They do have rapport together. Although him being young, I see a big week coming out here in week 2 for Kembrell Tompkins. So our consensus tight end pick for this week is?
Going back to Houston. Owen Daniels versus Tennessee.
And so what are we thinking on Houston from a consensus standpoint?
It dynamically fits. If Pittsburgh would have actually hit the middle of the field, if Ben had time and was really struggling to get through, he'd have done just as well as Schaub's going to do this week.
And let's not forget Heath Miller was out. Owen Daniels, solid tight end, always a reliable target for Schaub. He's our quarterback consensus. I like the combination.
Yeah.
Who do you have for your individual?
Individual, again. Actually, no, I won this week, this category, this position. So that's my one. But mine is Jimmy Graham versus Tampa Bay. Can't go wrong with him.
Jimmy Graham.
Statistically safe.
Statistically safe. Agreed. But, I have a really hard time arguing against Jimmy Graham. He puts up numbers every week. But I like my gut selection in this one even more. I'm going with Brandon Myers from the New York Football Giants against the Denver Broncos in the Manning Bowl.
Yep.
The reason I like it, and we actually talked about this a little earlier today as well, was Dallas Clark and his dusty bones was getting about 25 looks, it seemed like, from Joe Flacco. Brandon Myers seems to be a much better option as we look forward here for Eli Manning, who likes to hit his tight ends in tight situations.
Yep.
Expect him to do that, as the Broncos will probably bring the heat on him quite a bit.
No, I agree, and I think statistically he's going to be a good fill. Let's just get through this one real quick. Kickers.
Last week. Individually, who you have?
Individually, I have the leg, Greg Zuerlein versus Atlanta.
And I have Matt Bryant in a dome. I'll take it.
Against each other.
Against each other, so that ought to be good. Let's go on to defenses real quick. Our consensus defense pick for the week?
Now, this is a pure step out into the unordinary, but Oakland Raiders versus Jacksonville.
Well, anybody who watched Jacksonville last week has got a pretty good idea. One of our good friends, Mr. Teaspoon Willie, who you saw here last week, loves his chefs. If they put it on them, I don't see much changing this week with Oakland.
Right, and again, for the individuals, this is the one that you won this past week, the little stat problem. But anyway, Texans versus Tennessee.
I like Texans an awful lot. I personally went with the Cincinnati Bengals. I think they're going to take advantage of their very strong front four against the depleted Pittsburgh offensive line. I really see the Bengals taking advantage there.
No, I agree. So, again, we went over we discussed what our wager is going to be this week. It's either going to be a meal. Let's start with a meal.
Let's start with a meal. The dumb thing seems a little excessive out of the gate, but we'll see how the points fall out this week. With that being said, let's go on to kind of a newer segment. We're going to go on to our add, drop, and trade for this first week of the season. We've talked about this an awful lot. In our experience over 10 plus years, actually almost hitting on 15 years of fantasy football play, we've really seen effective pickups in week one and how they can really alter a season for a lot of folks. So
highest value.
Yeah, we saw a guy a couple of years ago who landed consecutive years, Arian Foster and then Chris Johnson. The guy's been in the points pretty consistently since then. Right.
No, and I agree, and I think in terms of value, where you draft them, where you can get them, this is one of the prime weeks, and I think mid-season is as well. So, I'll start with the ads, and for, week one, I think mine is Julian Edelman. Amendola hurt, and he will be constantly. This is a guy that you can not only store on your bench, but you can get him now. If you're in an actual auction waiver wire, bid reasonably high on him, but get him. I think he's one that's going to be in your roster all year.
Yeah, I think, I'm not going to argue with you much in this department. I think a lot of the players we discussed here are solid. Edelman is a familiar, confident target of Brady. It's hard to argue against that. Me, I went a little bit maybe off the wire a little bit here. I am calling up Mr. Eddie Royale with cheese to go with this one.
But a similar position.
And the reason I like this pick, one, you saw him get a couple looks at the goal line this week. Maybe a little surprising even to me. But the offense now is being dictated by the same kind of system that ran with Peyton Manning in Denver last year.
Right.
The slot receiver has always been a consistent producer out of those systems. And let's not forget, Eddie Royal early in his career was a very valuable asset to a Denver Broncos offense that was very successful.
Right. No, I agree with you there. Let's go to our next one, the actual drop side. Unfortunately, he's been on my teams. I had a lot of faith in him. But via fluke with his own teammate, Jacoby Jones.
Right.
I think that, he's got to be dropped because of knee and the type of injury that he had, which I experienced as well in my career. One of those things, Marlon Brown, 6'5", he's going to emerge as that young guy who can replace Bolden. Not fully replace him, but eventually get there. And that's what they like. They can mold him.
I can see it. Essentially, you're looking at maybe a wide receiver, too, that's no longer going to bring value for an awful long time. It's probably a pretty safe guy.
Only owned in 17% of leagues.
And I'm going to go with my drop and my personal distaste because I own this guy and have actually dropped him since this Brandon Pettigrew.
Right.
He scored me negative points.
Right.
Fantastic pickup. He scored me negative points in the gut versus the Geek this past week.
Right.
So essentially, he did not get the look at the goal line this week. Where that leads him, he's always been inconsistent. Now he's not getting the goal line looks. It's time to say goodbye, Mr. Pettigrew.
No, I think that's a safe bet. He's aging. My trade of the week is Dwayne Bowe.
Yeah, these are both interesting picks I think we made here. The trade was really hard to come by for us. I think you have some logic behind yours. I just have kind of a behind mine.
Yeah.
So
well, I'll just start and I'll say it quickly. Dwayne Bowe, I don't think that Alex Smith is ever going to get the ball to him. I think that what happened in week 1 is kind of a sign of the times. If Dwayne Bowe goes off and explodes this first week, put him out there. You'll be able to get, I think, maybe a better wide receiver, an RB2 for him, maybe even a package type deal if he stays high in value.
If you want to use a selling point as you're convincing your buddy to take this pick, if you really don't think he's going to produce, I believe it is something around 10 straight years that Andy Reid has had a receiver in the top 10 producers.
Right.
That's the gamble you take with trading him, but it could also be the selling point you get to get value back.
Right. No, I agree.
Mine actually surprised me that as we talked about these that I'm going with this.
Did you go with your gut?
I did go with my gut, and it was a little uneasy. Even that being said, I'm going with Roddy White.
Okay.
Now, Roddy White came out and said something
like
against the fantasy players, saying, "Hey, I play real football. I'm not talking about my injuries I go into a week." Reality, it's a high ankle sprain he's battling. Reality, he's very tough. Has never missed a regular season football game. That being said, high ankle sprains take forever to heal, and if you don't give them time to heal, you're not going to be yourself.
Right.
That being said, Julio Jones is on the other side. He's going to get the lion's share of the
Younger.
work. Roddy is a name player that could probably get you value.
99% of leagues.
And the one thing we discussed is wherever you drafted these players at, be certain you're getting value for that draft position.
Right.
We put these out there as kind of a different means to get value, but these are players. Do not get had just because somebody says, oh, they had a bad week.
Yeah.
Make sure you still drive where you drafted them and get that value for them.
Right. High percentage ownership, target them. So let's kind of close off again as we do each week with the Lama Locks of the Week. And this is a pretty quick segment. You've got 3 picks out of all of them. Again, we give each one of them. We give all 17 on FantasyLlama.com in the actual services side. And what I want to do is just go over 3 that we think are kind of the locks, and something like if you did a parlay or just a friendly wager with somebody across the desk.
What do you got?
I'm going to go Patriots versus Jets. Our sources tell us 11.5 point favorites. I'm going to say that right now the FantasyLlama.com algorithm gives them 11 points.
Yeah, I don't think much needs to be said about this game.
Right.
Pats over Jets. Next game.
Next game, Philadelphia Eagles versus San Diego. And what I'm seeing there, again, our sources say 7.5 is the actual trade spread right now. I'm going to go and say that the Lama actually produces looks like 8.5, 9.
So you're saying they cover the spread pretty easily?
Right.
Not going to lie to you. Things we discussed throughout this day, throughout this segments, I guess, across the board, we agree with that completely.
Right. And then I'm just going to continue the trend, and the last one being the Houston Texans. Why? I mean, the sources say 9.5%, or sorry, 9.5 points that the Houston wouldn't buy.
And what do you have it listed as?
Well, right now I have for the actual game is 11.
Yeah, and I think this is a no-brainer. You've listed several players across the board that we think are going to go big. The way that defense showed up in the second half,
Right.
I have a hard time thinking many points, if any, will be scored against them this week.
Right. No, I agree. And just to kind of close off, I finished last week with all the picks at 10-6. 10-6 for week 1 is pretty darn good. Not having known or seen any games, no performances coming in, I'm actually happy with that number.
And with that being said, this was week 2. I'm Aaron Bell, the Gut.
I'm Brad Ryan, the Geek. Let's see you next week.
Hey, let 'em do it.